ahead, get started.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending this event tonight, How Dems Abroad is Fighting for Us for U.S. Tax Relief for Americans Abroad. Oh, my camera just turned off, so let's see. Sorry. Yeah, so how Dems Abroad is fighting for tax relief for Americans abroad. First, I want to stress that this is a nonpartisan event. Everybody is completely welcome. The point of the event tonight is to educate people on a little bit the history, what's been going on, and where we are. And so, you know, a few things I just want to emphasize to start. First of all, Carmelan has been working on this for 10 years, and she's done a lot of work. And she does this full time, speaking to members of Congress. She takes regular trips to Washington from Australia. You know, we are really, really lucky to have her. We're really lucky to have her tonight because, you know, she's a very, very busy individual. And so please take advantage of this. On top of that, the one thing I want to stress is, because, you know, some of you might not be overly familiar with Democrats Abroad because you're new, is that recently at our global meeting, we passed a resolution to put tax reform as an issue central towards DA. And as we're part of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, that means we are going to be pushing the DNC on these issues. So these include things, for example, like the fact that we have to we get double taxed, so dealing with that we should only be able to pay taxes in the country we live in, being able to invest in local pension schemes without being double taxed, and for those entrepreneurs who have to deal with GILTI and GILTI, which Carmelan will explain more in detail. So we are basically at the best point we've ever been now. And the reason I've organized this call is because Carmelan also believes the same thing, and she wants to share with you what we can do and where we are. So look, please, everybody tonight, listen. We're lucky to have Carmelan. I really hope everyone, if they can, you know, afterwards, if they can just volunteer and just help her out, that would be great, because in the future we might not have a Carmelan, and that means we might not be able to make the progress we've made so far. I just request, we're going to keep this with cameras. We're going to make it a very, very, we're going to make this a very casual discussion. So just put your question in the chat and I'll call on you, and then you can just unmute yourself, camera on, camera off, how you want, and feel free to ask. So that's it. And we've allotted an hour, but you know, if there's demand, we have extra time as well. Anyway, I'll pass it to you, Carmelan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. You're too generous. Okay, so yeah, this is about how we're fighting for tax reform for Americans abroad. So just a few sentences of background. The team that I lead was established in 2011. Like Raphael said, we've been at this for 10 years, speaking to Congress about the many ways that the U.S. tax code discriminates against Americans abroad, drawing their attention to the urgency, the urgent need for relief, and talking to them about reform recommendations. We have a very important year in front of us. 2017 was a very big year for us. We were in the same sort of situation where we knew there was going to be tax legislation going through the Congress. The only thing is the Republicans were in control, and so it was very hard for us to make any headway. But anyway, I can talk about that more later. But as I said, 2021 is going to be very exciting. So a bit about what the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force does. There's 12 of us at this point. We're all volunteers, and there's a bunch of us who have quite specific technical areas of expertise, like tax return preparers, or an expertise in financial markets and the way financial account reporting is dealt with from an institutional point of view, and also from a regulatory point of view. Anyway, we have some people who have technical expertise and some people who are just really great at organizing stuff and getting stuff done. So we have a multi-pronged approach, because when you're working on a project, an initiative that's this hard, you need to be doing it all. You need to be doing everything. You need to be doing everything really well, and you need to be doing everything all the time. So our strategy is one, we have research. We have our own research. We have numbers that nobody else has on the Americans abroad community and how the taxation affects us. Number two, we write position papers. We research the issues that are problematic for Americans abroad. We write position papers on them, and it's a thought leadership piece. You know, what can we do? What remedies are out there to address these various issues? We write to Congress in response to the sort of hearings that are going on. Like at this year, there has been dozens of hearings, tons of hearings, because Congress is examining ways to draft the legislation, the infrastructure bill, and then the budget reconciliation bill. They're bringing in experts. They're bringing in people who can give them facts about the state of affairs with taxation, the tax gap, and this kind of thing. And when they have a hearing, anyone is invited to make a statement for the record, and we're making submissions. We've made a half a dozen submissions this year. It's an opportunity for us to profile our issues again, put our research in front of them, and give them our reform recommendations. The fourth thing that we do, we run grassroots campaigns. We host campaigns for people in our community who are very passionate about reforms to the tax law to call their members of Congress and ask for it. Because the thing that we say all the time is that tax reform for Americans abroad will happen when enough of us pick up the phone, talk to our members of Congress, and ask for it. The last piece is we talk to Congress, like Raphael said. We've had hundreds of meetings over the years. Over the last 5 years, we've had hundreds of meetings. Actually, we probably have had, many hundreds of meetings over the 10 years that we've been at this. And those meetings that we have, they're very detailed information that we're giving them. We're talking about remedies. We're talking about in detail about how they could be implemented and how they should be structured. We're talking to the legislative directors and the congressional aides who engage then with the committee staff who write the bills. And this is what's going on now. I'm having a few meetings every week with aides who are the legislative directors for the specific members of Congress who work on the tax writing committees. And I'm talking them through our reform recommendations. They're asking me questions, and I'm feeding them information that they could use to then have conversations with the members and with the committee staff. So those last two things, the grassroots campaigns and the discussions with Congress, are actually giving rise to a new initiative that we're doing this year, which are meetings, Zoom meetings for the constituents of the specific members of Congress who we need to persuade to support our reforms this year. So the first one has been organized for next week. It's in the diary, and we hope to have about a dozen more through the month of July. So these are members of, as I said, of the Special Revenues Measures and House Ways and Means Committee. These are the members of Congress who are working on the tax reform, and we are bringing their constituents abroad into the room with them, into a Zoom room with them, and having their constituents talk to them about how important it is that we use this opportunity this year to secure some relief for Americans abroad. Okay, so how am I doing? Is everyone okay? Are there questions coming up? Should we stop now, or can I talk a little bit more about the legislation? What do you think?
Keep going for now. Just explain everything, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. Okay, so just to recap, I'm sure you all know this, but this is a big year because Congress is going to pass these very important Biden initiatives this year. They're going to pass the we hope they're going to pass the infrastructure bill, which is the American Jobs Plan. And with it, there's the Made in America tax plan. So those are going to be the infrastructure bill that we keep hearing about.
That is on track to be a bipartisan piece of legislation that will include funding for infrastructure, the sort of traditional infrastructure that we all think about. Then there's the budget reconciliation bill. The budget resolution is going to result in another bill that's not going to be bipartisan in all likelihood, because it's going to go through the budget reconciliation process, which doesn't need any more than 51 votes in the Senate. And that bill is all the social infrastructure that we've been hearing about, the spending on childcare and education, and all these things that help Americans stay in the workforce. So that's what's happening this year. And our reforms can fit probably into any one of those three instruments. And that's still to be decided. Then that's the discussions that we're having now. So it's a bit too soon to tell. Okay, so what are our reform recommendations? So I know that most of you are from Democrats Abroad, but for those who aren't, there's a bit of a Democrats Abroad, policy discussion in this. But basically, I'm talking to you about the reforms that we as an organization are putting our muscle behind. So for years, we have been talking to Congress about residency-based taxation. Residency-based taxation essentially would usher in a new system where all of us would still be required to disclose and declare the income that we make in the United States, but we would not be required to declare the income that we make and pay tax on in other countries. Now that's residency-based taxation. And that's not residency-based taxation, because there's a whole lot more to it than that. That's just a really simple way to explain it. But there's going to be a great deal more to talk about. The design elements of this bill are going to have to accommodate people who are just moving outside the United States and people who've been living here for decades. It's going to have to accommodate people who have made their life outside the United States and people who are living outside the United States for a few years, but then are going to go back home. It needs to accommodate people who move back and forth all the time. Their work sees them moving back and forth all the time. It's going to have to include provisions that accommodate working class Americans, people who are just in ordinary jobs, and it's going to have to deal with high net worth Americans or high earners who live abroad, who have a special concern for Congress, and so there's going to. And there's also there's even more. I mean, there's different types of income. There's ordinary income from work, and then there's income from wealth, and these need to be accommodated, and they're going to be treated differently. So at the moment, our very good friends at ACA, which is American Citizens Abroad, it's a non-partisan organization that advocates on behalf of Americans abroad. We work very, very closely with them. We collaborate very closely. Mary Louise Serrato is their executive director. I respect her enormously. She's been at this as long as I have. She really knows her stuff. And she is, her organization is doing some extremely important research at the moment on residency-based taxation, work that will end up creating the design elements of the bill. We don't know what that looks like yet. The work is still happening. They expect it to be finished in a month or so. And when their work is finished, they're going to have a model for residency-based taxation that's revenue neutral to the federal government, because it needs to be. We're not going to, it's a very, very particular time that we're in right now. Our government is spending trillions of dollars to restore the health of the nation, to pick the economy up off its knees. If you go to Congress talking to them about a reform that's going to cost them money, that's going to be a very short conversation, because this is not the year to talk about spending money. They've already established what they're going to spend money on. They're looking for revenue. So if you're going to present a reform, you're going to have it already paid for, or else they just don't have time for that. This is the cycle that we're in, and so we have to accommodate that. Where was I? So residency-based taxation. So all that work is happening. Now, that work may be finished in time for us to have a great proposal. It might not be finished in time. It might be something that Congress is ready to consider, but it's hard to know whether we have done enough to persuade Congress that they should embrace this. We don't know yet. We're still having those conversations. So whilst all that is going on, that's a lot of work. While all that is going on, we are talking to Congress about 3 things that we know that they can do, or we feel very, very strongly that they could do. And I mean, again, it sounds simple, but then it's really not when you dig into the tax administration aspects of it. But they are, number 1, we're looking for filing modification for the vast majority of Americans who file from abroad who don't owe anything. We file these returns that go for 60 pages, and we spend hundreds of dollars to have tax return preparers put them together for us, and they show that we don't owe any income, and it's maddening. This is the message I get from people most often. They're in this situation. So that's the first reform that we're talking about. Should be revenue neutral because it has no tax effect, because this is a filing modification you're doing for people who don't owe anything anyway. The second one relates to the GILTI tax. So GILTI is the tax on the profits of companies registered abroad. So as we know, these taxes, which were ushered in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, had as their focus the foreign subsidiaries of very large companies like Coca-Cola and Apple and Starbucks and Amazon and ExxonMobil, these kind of companies. And the calculation to establish what their liability is, lends itself to a large corporation. It doesn't lend itself to the small to medium-sized businesses that up to 20% of Americans abroad are running. But those companies, those businesses, which are organized as a company structure, because of the sloppy way the law was designed and drafted with great haste, as we all recall, those businesses are caught with GILTI as well. So we're asking for an exemption. I mean, it's so clear that these were never meant to be caught up with GILTI. So we are asking for an exemption from GILTI tax for the companies that are owned by US individuals living abroad, whose assessable income is less than $400,000, whose adjusted gross income is less than $400,000. So we're tying in there to this pledge that President Biden made during the time he was running for office, where he pledged that he would not raise taxes on anyone who makes under $400,000. So we're using that as our hook. We're making the case that this tax was never meant to affect these particular individuals, and that's the basis for our recommendation. The third one is a whole group of reforms to the FBAR. The FBAR report, the report of foreign bank accounts that were required to submit. The reporting requirement has not been updated or adjusted since the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 was enacted. So there's lots of ways that this reporting requirement could be reformed, not the least of which is to eliminate the duplication that we all endure when we have to file a FATCA filing and the FBAR. This is a reform that the National Taxpayer Advocate has been talking to the IRS about for years. I mean, it's just so common sense. And so that and a number of other reforms to the FBAR are included in our reform recommendations. Of course, we're also still talking about the FATCA reform for Americans abroad. That's another reform that the National Taxpayer Advocate supports, is the elimination of all financial account reporting for Americans abroad for the accounts in the countries where they live, because nobody hides money from the tax authorities in accounts in the country where they already live and our paying tax. So again, it's another common sense reform. A bill to enact this reform has been introduced for the last 3 Congresses by Representative Carmelan Polce of New York, and hasn't been introduced yet in this Congress, but I'm assured that it's coming. Another bill that she has been sponsoring for several years, several Congresses, is the bill to establish a commission on Americans abroad. And this commission would be tasked with examining this whole litany of laws that discriminate, laws and provisions of the tax code that inadvertently discriminate against Americans abroad, and make reform recommendations. So that's another bill. There's more. I mean, we need PFIC relief. We need PFIC relief. It makes no sense that that there are these hugely punitive tax consequences for investing in mutual funds in the country that you live in. It makes no sense. These are a relic of some blue sky laws, is what they're called, and we need to keep reminding Congress about the inequity of this provision of the tax code, which is kind of made even worse by the fact that if you don't have a U.S. residential address, it's actually not easy to invest in the United States either. So, what are we meant to do? It's something that is complicated to talk about. When you talk about remedies, Congress gets very uncomfortable. I don't know, for some reason, Senate Democrats don't like to talk about PFIC reform. They feel like it's something that's only going to benefit really rich people, and we need to constantly remind them that these are just ordinary mutual funds that anybody who is saving for their retirement, saving for their child's future, is going to invest in. So that's another thing we talk about. There's more as well. Should I stop now? It's I'm sort of more concerned about knowing what everyone on this call wants to know rather than what I want to tell you, because maybe I'm missing the mark. So maybe, Rafa, are there questions in the chat that I can respond to?
I don't see any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Or I can actually also ask a few questions, things that people have kind of been asking me leading up to the event. I can wait a minute if anyone wants to put any questions in the chat. Are there any?
Hey, it's Steve Oken. I'll ask a question if you want.
Go right ahead,
Hi.
Steve.
Hey, Carmen, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Good to see you.
Likewise. Look, you've been the leader on this for a decade, and and the AmChamps have come in and out a bit, trying to help. And the main issue is always, and you highlighted it, how are you going to pay for this? What's your offset if you're gonna? So how much have you calculated yet what the revenue cost to the Treasury would be if the reforms that you've described were to go into effect? And how difficult would it be to find some offsets for that?
Okay, well, the first reform RBT, I should talk about RBT first. So that's exactly what the ACA work is about, is doing the budget scoring for the budget scoring office. They've got District Economics Group is the consulting firm that has their baseline model, and there was just a discussion about it last night where they really talked in detail about the model in a way that they haven't before. And they have new data, and they're broadening the study that's behind the baseline, and they are doing the work to establish what the impact is going to be on the budget in order to establish what the levers are going to be. So there's going to be some amount of tax that doesn't get paid if we all are forgiven, and they're going to be able to tell Congress that. The point that they were making in this discussion last night was that the Joint Committee on Taxation doesn't know. The budget office doesn't know. They don't have enough information about the Americans abroad community to even answer the questions to calculate this. But DEG does, and they're doing the work now. So in terms of these other reforms that we're talking about, will filing modification for those who don't owe, there will be no revenue impact. If you don't owe, you're just going to be given a more modest filing so that you don't have to go through the trouble and the expense. The GILTI is harder because we don't know how much revenue the government is collecting from GILTI. There was just a data dump last week, but it only goes up to 2018. So we don't really know. And that was only the first year when GILTI was being implemented. So we don't actually have the data to make a good judgment about that. In 2018, we ran a campaign to bring this issue to the awareness of Congress, and about 150 people took part in it. So I've gone back to those people, and I'm asking them, like, what impact did this have on you? Just so I can get an idea about what kind of tax they are paying, what kind of expense that they're going to. Have they had to restructure their business? So I'm pulling together some research so I can describe the problem a little bit better. That's always a good starting point. And to use this small sample I have to get an idea of what on average organizations are paying. You know, if you're in this band of total revenue, what kind of GILTI liability have you got? And that's about as much as I can do because the data doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been published yet by the IRS. The other reform is the FBAR and the FATCA reform. That obviously has no revenue impact. The PFIC reforms, again, I don't have any numbers on that, but the ACA work will be doing a deep dive on that. That would make such a material difference to Americans abroad to have some movement on PFIC.
I guess so my one follow-up would be, no, it does. And my one follow-up would be, is there discussion of splitting the reform proposals so that those that do not have a revenue impact could try and go forward in this Congress, and that those like moving to a residence-based taxation would wait for the next Congress? Or is it you want to get everything at once?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I don't think that we've done enough to personally. I mean, I'm having conversations with Congress every single week, and I don't think we've done enough to persuade them yet. I think that the numbers that ACA is doing will be enormously helpful with the budget office and the JCT, and that's the really important starting point. But then, you know, we always have this really serious problem with Senate Democrats. They just can't get their get their head around a filing exemption, and their fear that it's going to create this enormous tax loophole that every rich bastard and their brother is going to walk through, and the coffers of the IRS will just be drained of money. And you know, it's very hard to have this conversation with Senate Democrats. And there was a huge amount of work done on a proposal to implement residency-based taxation in 2018. And we talked hours and hours about anti-avoidance provisions, hours and hours. Like, what else can we do? Or what else might work for you? Or how else would you do this? And we'd concede to everything, and they would still be like, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's very hard. That's the stumbling block.
Thank you for all the work you're doing. It's amazing, and pushing the boulder uphill sometimes, but thanks.
It is. I am Sisyphus. Yes.
The next question is from Jackie, and just before she let her ask her question, just to lead into that, she has a very good question. One thing I just want to emphasize is we have 250,000 members of Democrats abroad. And to give you just an idea, it's really, really important if you can participate in calling and writing your members. Just to give a really good example, when Donald Trump was elected in 2016 and had the trifecta of holding the House of Representatives and the Senate, they couldn't get rid of the ACA through budget reconciliation because because their constituents just called and complained so much. Even the Republicans got scared and it just didn't go through. So I really just want to, before Jackie with her excellent question, I just wanted to make that point. But Jackie, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, my question was just in terms of contacting our members of Congress, if you have, I was interested in knowing if you have a template or any kind of guidelines of points to make that you can make available to us to make it easier to contact them, write them.
Yes, we have a campaign guide. Whenever we publish whenever we launch a grassroots campaign, and we do about a half a dozen of these a year, we've only done 2 so far this year. We publish a campaign guide, and the guide, it gives you an update on the state of play. It gives you the things that we want you to do. We want you to call. We want you to write. Tells you that. It gives you the information that you need to find your member of Congress if you don't know who they are, your Republican, your senators and your members of the House of Representatives. And then it gives you a script so you know what to say when you call, and some language so that you know what to write when you write. And that's all that's in it. This is it's a guide. It's a PDF, and we've decided that we need to not make it a PDF. We're going to try to find a way to put it on the website. But the answer to your question is yes. And that the fact that that it's not widely understood that we publish these campaign guides is part of the problem. We have a really hard time communicating with the people who really care about our work. So that's why this is so important. So thank you all for being here. So we're cutting out the middleman and going right to the people who are interested in this topic.
The next question is from Chris Tachibana. Go ahead, just unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks for doing this. I was wondering what the implications for tax reform are for voting rights. I'm in Denmark right now, and I know that people who are Danish citizens who don't live in Denmark don't have the tax problems, but they also don't get to vote.
Okay, so taxation is obviously managed at the federal level by the IRS. Voting rights are bestowed by the states, except that the act that empowers all of us to vote, that gives us the right, is the UOCAVA Act, the Uniformed and Overseas Civilian Access to Voting Act, and so they're very separate. Okay, a couple of things at the moment. We have a problem with people who are not compliant with their tax filing because they're afraid to vote. They're afraid to lift their head above the parapet because they think, I know I'm not filing and I'm supposed to be, and so I'm not going to vote because I just don't want to put myself anywhere near the US government radar. So we already have a problem with people not voting because of taxation. It's already an obstacle. It's already a kind of voter suppression. If we could clarify the taxation arrangement for Americans abroad, if we had this filing modification, or if we had residency-based taxation, it would bring huge numbers of people into tax compliance. Congress is obsessed with compliance. They're obsessed with tax compliance. They will love that the amount of compliance with taxation goes up. They will not want to impact that by taking people's voting rights away. To take our voting rights away, they would have to repeal UOCAVA. Not only would they have to repeal UOCAVA, they have to repeal it and replace it with an act that gives voting rights just to the military. And then maybe it would have to be just to the military and the veterans or something. And it would get very complicated and it would look messy and awful. And Congress does not want to waste their time doing that. In the first instance, Democrats are avowed defenders of the right to vote, and this is not going to happen as long as the Democrats can avoid it. And Republicans aren't going to want to invest their political capital on taking away the rights to vote of a certain group of citizens. I mean, the act would have to, like, I don't know, contextualize what if you live abroad for a certain amount of time and then you come back. I mean, the whole can of worms that it opens up, that Congress has other problems to deal with. I do not think that this is what they're going to invest their time in. So it's a reasonable concern. To be honest, there's discussion in my Twitter mentions this last couple of weeks has actually included a dialogue about, well, with a number of people saying that they might actually be willing to give away their right to vote if they didn't have to file taxes. I thought, oh my God, I don't want this to kind of snowball. That is not where we want to be going. That is not the direction we should be heading in. But there's so much heat at the moment on the support for a filing exemption for Americans abroad that people are willing to go that far. So it's a really good question you ask. Thank you for asking it. And I don't personally have a concern about it because, as I said, this is going to make people compliant, more tax compliant than they are now. And I think that that's a good thing that Congress won't want to punish by taking away the right to vote.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Carmelan. Jen J, thanks for that nice comment. The next question is from Scott Baker. You can unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Thank you. I was just asking a question about what is your communication strategy to sort of the DA membership? Because I really am appreciative of, the calls, the Congress calls and stuff like that, but I find that I find out about it a bit like last minute. And so it's hard for me to kind of spread the word about it. So I just didn't know if there was a strategy or where's the best place to look when these events occur.
Okay, so the best place to find information is on the taxation page of the Democrats Broad website. But we message out, probably not as much as we should, but we're just so busy at the moment and things are moving so quickly. We message out to the people who've signed up for updates on the taxation page. So those people are getting kind of a more steady stream of information about what we're doing and how we're doing it. But beyond that, we rely on the chairs of the country committees and the local chapters to share our information. We send out a message over leadership saying, this is what's happening, look out for this, or here's the campaign that we're running. It starts a week from Thursday. Please share it with your members. Please put it on your social media channels. We get some country committees who do a really good job at putting out our information, like Lion City, and Belgium and Germany and France and Canada. Some country committees do a great job at taking the campaigns that we need our members to know about and pushing them out to their members in their member communications and on social media. Others, like my own country committee, do not do such a good job. So this has been a serious complaint of the Taxation Task Force for a long time. And it's like we always say, these reforms aren't going to happen until lots and lots and lots of Americans abroad message their members of Congress and say, we need this, we want this, we are demanding this. So thank you for your question. It's probably the most important statement I have to make.
Thank you very much, Scott. The next question is from Travis. Please unmute yourself. Go right ahead. I can just add, ask Travis Todd's question. He said, what's the main messaging that DA will use for drumming up support on such a complicated topic? Who are the biggest potential allies in Congress for us to write to?
Okay, you should always write to your own member of Congress. That's who your voice is heard the loudest and the clearest. Write to your own member of Congress. Beyond that, the discussions that we are having all the time are with the Ways and Means Committee members, and even more specific than that, the particular tax writing subcommittee. It's called Special Revenues Measures Subcommittee. And we're talking to them, or the Taxation Task Force, we're talking to them constantly about our reform recommendations. So what you can do is write to your own member of Congress, because they'll listen to you. If you write to someone who's not your member, they're not gonna be as interested. In fact, you'll probably, if you've ever tried to send a message using the websites of the members of Congress, you ordinarily can't send an electronic message unless you are a constituent and put in your zip code. So that, that tells you they really only want to hear from their constituents. And that's why we've selected these particular members whose support is essential to us getting some relief this year in these bills. We've selected them, and now we've invited their members to meet with them, because that convergence is the gold. That's what you want. That's the centerpiece here of a powerful communication. Get constituents who can make a clean, clear statement about their need for this to the person who's actually, has it within their congressional ambit to deal with the problem. That's what we're doing.
Just a quick question: is the best thing to do then to just call your member on the phone, even if you're over here, and leave a message, or just or sending an email you think is equally effective?
The most effective thing is a phone call. It's always the most effective thing. Not everyone's comfortable making a phone call, even if they have our script in front of them. So you can send an electronic message. Probably after a phone call, a handwritten letter is probably the next best thing, because that makes quite a powerful impact when it lands in the office. And then, a typewritten letter, and then an electronic message. We ran a campaign in August of last year, asking people to find their members of Congress on social media and find a way to comment about tax reform or the need for tax reform on social media. Not only were we asking them to find their members of Congress, we were asking them to find the candidate who's opposing their current member of Congress, and find their campaign Twitter handle or Instagram page and put comments on there. I'm not sure how much activity actually was registered in response to that campaign, and I'm not sure how much good it did. But I through a comment I put on my member of Congress's Instagram page, I got invited to a town hall. I was the only member of her constituency attending that town hall from abroad, but it made an impact. And then I followed up later with some information about our reform recommendations, and then I followed up with a request that she join the Americans Abroad Caucus, and she has. So it took a little while, but it got me there. It takes some perseverance sometimes.
Good work. Thank you very much. The next question is from Timothy Foote. Go right ahead, unmute yourself. I'll just read his question then. What are the timelines for getting rid of double taxation, or to address the bills you were mentioning will be tied to the regular budget?
Okay, so the timeline is, this new things being announced every day. I mean, yesterday, the White House is saying that they think that the budget reconciliation bill will go through the House and the Senate in July. So, and it's not even the reconciliation bill; it's the budget resolution. And not to get into the nitty gritty of it, but they're saying that the budget resolution will be passed by the end of July, which is not the bill. That's the framing for how much the bill can cost, whether it's going to be $246 trillion, whatever it's going to be. And that's going to set up the frame. I don't know if you remember in 2018, the number was 1.9 trillion. The tax bill could not cost more than 1.9 trillion. It was all we heard about was 1.9 trillion. And that's the figure that's going to be established by the end of July. as of yesterday, that was said. The next step that happens is, and actually it's happening now, what's happening right now is the members of the Ways and Means Committee are kind of having these one-on-one conversations with so that's the committee in the House that writes the bill. They're having the conversation with the staffers who write the bill about what their preferences are and what they want to see and what their priorities are and what their ideas are. There's these bilateral meetings are happening all the time. And that's what I'm feeding into. That's what I'm feeding our ideas into with these members who are friends of Democrats abroad. And the next thing that's going to happen is the Congress will go away for the month of August, and the Ways and Means staffers will be writing the bill. They'll be writing furiously that whole month. And then September and October, there'll be debate on the floor on both of these bills. The infrastructure bill, that's the bipartisan bill, and the budget resolution, the reconciliation bill, which is going to be all the other stuff in the bill. And that's going, as I said, much of it will be written, but there's going to be debates, and then there'll be a vote, and somewhere between September and November, there'll be a vote in the House and the vote in the Senate, and then there'll be a conference committee where they come together and they work out the differences in the bill. If it goes like it did in 2017, which I'm not sure is a typical year because, the Republicans raced that huge tax bill through between about the middle of September and the middle of December, which is otherworldly to do it that, and there was tons and tons of mistakes as a result. But if it goes, basically if it goes the way we want it to, our reform recommendations will have been fed into this work going on now in July and August, and will appear in the bill. If that doesn't happen, and I think that with the RBT proposal, it might be a bit late and it might need to be fed into the process a bit later, then you have no choice but to go in as an amendment. And the way the amendments were processed in 2017 is they went in through the Senate Finance Committee. So, and I could take you through the story of what happened if you want to hear, but basically you don't want to rely on that write-up is what is called markup, sorry, that you don't want to rely on that markup committee meeting to get your amendment in. You really need to have done all the work ahead of time, and still it's very, very risky. So someone asked me before also like who our friends are. I'm not sure if this question is the last question. I also wanted to mention that we have these other friends in Congress who are Jamie Raskin, who used to be a member of Democrats abroad in France, Dina Titus. So Jamie Raskin is the Maryland 8. Dina Titus is the Nevada 1, and Carolyn Maloney, the New York 12, and Don Beyer, the Virginia 8. And these are members of Congress who are very good friends. We can get answers from them. We can get inside information from them. They always make time for us. So they're an extremely valuable resource. We've cultivated these relationships over years, and we're building new relationships to add to that over time. But they're absolutely irreplaceable. If you ever have an opportunity to reach out to one of these 4 members of Congress and thank them, please do.
Can you name them once again, please?
It's Jamie Raskin, the Maryland 8. And the thing is that Jamie Raskin's now sort of become like a household name because of the role he played in the second impeachment trial. And in fact, he's on every committee, and he's become a superstar. And it's only his 2nd term in Congress, so he's a little bit less accessible. And still, I always get a meeting with his office. It's very impressive. So it's Jamie Raskin, Dina Titus, who also lived abroad for many years and so understands our plight, our situation. Don Beyer, who was Obama's ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein from 2009 to 2013. Again, huge familiarity with the challenges that we face with the tax code, and Carmelan Polce, and she's the founder of the Americans Abroad Caucus. She represents the New York 12, and more Americans abroad vote in the New York 12 than any one district. So she just has a huge constituency of Americans abroad.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Carol Moore.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question than I wrote in the box. Because Carmelan, I work with Carmelan, everybody, and she is doing an absolutely superhuman job over the last few months. So thank you, Carmelan, for all you're doing. But my question is what you were just talking about, because I just went to my congresswoman, who is Lois Franco, Florida 21, West Palm Beach, and I asked her to join the American Abroad Caucus, but she wasn't sure what it's doing. And I was wondering, I know Carmelan Polce hasn't done a whole lot recently. So should we get, because I think a commission would be wonderful to look at all of these issues. And that could be done by the Democratic majority in the House, right? So should we really have a campaign? I mean, after you finish this campaign, because you're doing this campaign right now, but should we have a push for everybody to get their congressperson to join the American Abroad Caucus and get a commission to look at so many of these issues?
These commissions need to be appointed by an act of the Congress because they get funding. So there's a bill to
wait. Nancy Pelosi is just appointing a commission to look in January 6th. It sounded like commissions could be appointed in the House to look at issues. That's what I took from that.
That's a standing commission, isn't it? It's like a task force. It's around the task.
We could look at it, but go ahead.
Yeah, but we'd be looking to have a standing commission. Not a temporary commission, but a permanent commission, not just a temporary commission. So I guess there's two different types. But anyway, the question you ask is a really good one about the Americans Abroad Caucus and what does it do. And the truth is, it hasn't done very much in the last term or more. And because Carmelan Polce is so busy now as chair of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, we persuaded her to appoint a co-chair, which is Dina Titus. And Dina Titus will be a much more engaged chair. The problem is that they are looking for, and they don't need it, but they're looking for a Republican co-chair. And until they get a Republican co-chair, they're not going out formally to recruit. They send around a Dear Colleagues letter and invite people to join. They kind of do a formal registration of the caucus and then invite through a Dear Colleague letter and invite people to join. They want to get a Republican on board first to make it bipartisan. As I said, they do not need that, but they want that. And so I was under the impression, okay, it's going to be registered. We're waiting January, February, March. Finally, I just said, forget it. We don't need to wait for this caucus to be registered to invite our members to ask their members of Congress to join. So we did that. And we said, just call this particular aide or ask your member to call this particular aide in Carmelan Polce's office and tell them that they want to join. So six did. And that's through our work, through Democrats Abroad. 6 people who weren't on the caucus before, I've now got their name on the list. So that's not nothing.
That's great. If you could put in the box and tell us who the staffer is to call in Polce's office, I didn't have that. But I agree with you. It will be great to get more on that as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Carol, for all you're doing for the task force. Carol's been awesome and so amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol. So Timothy Foote isn't online, but I'll read his question because it's a good question, and I'll just add a corollary. He said, is there not one Republican that wants to help their own overseas supporters? And could you just elaborate a little bit on where the Republicans are with helping us on this issue, because it obviously equally affects their overseas constituents as well?
Yeah, if your member of Congress is a Republican, reach out to them as well. Okay, so the in terms of drafting a bill to enact residency-based taxation, the most work that's ever been done has been done by a Republican, George Holding from the North Carolina 2. Now his state was redistricted and he did not recontest his seat. He's not in the Congress this year, but he wrote the bill to the residency-based taxation bill that was introduced into the Congress 2 Congresses ago. It wasn't, so just very, very briefly, we spent all of 2018, so this is the second year of the second year of the Trump administration, working with Representative Holding's team on this bill. It was us and RO was in the discussions, Republicans overseas, and also ACA were in the discussions talking through these design elements, what I was talking about before, like all the different provisions that need to go into the bill. And this is when we had these lengthy conversations about the anti-avoidance provisions, so that rich people couldn't use this as a loophole to get out of paying taxes by establishing either real or fraudulent, pretend offshore residency. So much went into these discussions. I mean, back and forth I was living in New York for a temporary work assignment, and so I was able to go back and forth to Washington, D.C. constantly to talk about this bill and to work on it. And finally, on the last sitting day of the Congress, something was introduced, and it was like paper thin. Like, we had done all this work. We had, carefully articulated all these provisions of the bill, and what was in it was very, very high level. It was a good bill. It was a good starting point, given that we had already done all the work. It was like an excellent framework for the legislation, because we already knew what the holes were that needed to be filled, and so it was a decent piece of work, and it was a milestone because we finally had something. So it was good. It wasn't complete, but it was good. And it was done by Republican. Unfortunately, it was done during a time when there was no tax legislation going through the Congress. And that's what makes this year so special, so important, so different, so unique, so might not happen again for another 5 or 10 years, is that we have a vehicle. We have some reforms, and there's actually a vehicle that we can use to set our reforms on and push them through. And that's why all that work that we did in 2018, it was only ever going to be a sort of a messaging bill, because this isn't the kind of reform that's going to get passed on a standalone basis. It just doesn't work that way. It needs to be a part of a whole group of reforms. And this year that's happening. There is going to be a tax bill. We have a great opportunity, and that's where we are pushing with all our might, pulling every lever, working our guts out to make it happen, because this year we have a bill and we have a platform, and that the iron couldn't be hotter, and we are striking.
Hi, I know there was a bit of in a discussion on that chat. I think Anthony kind of had a comment. Would you like to ask that? Go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Why are we calling this RBT when this isn't real RBT? It's like a carve out. We have all this revenue neutral aspects that are needed put in this version, when I think it's pretty clear to, at least to myself and a lot of other people, that revenue neutral isn't required. It's almost like we're sacrificing some leverage by mentioning this, and B, it's quite immoral, where there's a lot of assumptions that need to be placed with having a revenue neutral bill like this. So for example, my children are not born in the US. So how do you apply children who are never a part of the original tax base to then be revenue neutral? We didn't do this for lots of other laws throughout American history. So is there a reason why we have to be tied to this concept, when in reality, it actually should be revenue positive if we want to actually start spinning it, which is like Travis's comment. I think there's a lot of angles to this that I think we're really hurting ourselves by not adopting a pure RBT play, and by doing all these, provisions and everything. It's just going to be paperwork upon paperwork and loopholes, where we should just practice RBT like every other country in the world.
Okay. So a couple of things. When you talk to Congress, you really, this doesn't make any sense to us, but you really cannot talk about how things are done in every other part of the world. And I don't know why this is, but they simply don't care. It doesn't, when you're in the room having the discussion, you're not going to make
Bernie
any friends.
Sanders always mentions Denmark and Scandinavian countries. So obviously we have people who do look at other countries for inspiration.
Yeah, I'm saying that that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's not something that we, it would be great if we could make that. But I'm saying that your rank and file member of the Congress who is not Bernie Sanders, and they don't want to hear about things that are done in other countries. And that's sad and pathetic. That's just the way it is. Okay. Secondly, we're having this very nuanced discussion and talking about all the provisions that need to go into this bill, because there isn't just one type of American abroad. There's many different people in many different situations. And the bill needs to accommodate them. On top of that, the bill needs to accommodate, as I said, this really profound obsession that Congress has with creating tax loopholes. So there's just been a huge hearing about closing the tax gap, a Senate Finance Committee hearing, and lots of discussion about financial accounts and how much money is held. They're really, really obsessed with it. You can go to Congress and bring a line of thinking that sort of dismisses all of that concern, but you have to persuade the people who have the pen. And the people who have the pen have these really profound concerns. And so you have to deal with them. As for revenue neutrality, I'm not sure I exactly understood about your children. I also have, this is sort of one of my main motivators, is that my partner, who's not American, would very, very much like for my child to give up their US citizenship because of this taxation issue. And that would break my heart. And that is one of the main reasons I am working so hard on this. And so it's a very, very powerful motivator for many people. It shatters them to think that they went through the trouble to register their child's birth at the consulate just to saddle them with this hugely expensive nightmare that they're going to have to live with the rest of their life. It just shatters people. And I admit I'm one of them. It makes me feel so guilty.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm in it. And you asked about the revenue. It's not required, but it sounds like what you're saying is the only way we're going to get anything passed is by showing money. And so
the only way that we're going,
right. So then what? But what about the soft power? What about the fact that if they don't invest in us, we're walking, talking ambassadors. We are people who are free, frontline members. And by the way, we're losing out on innovation. We're losing out on cultural, infusion. And if Democrats, who are supposed to be for all these liberal philosophies and not the money people, can't see that, then why am I supposed to vote for somebody who's going to do that? And then yes, my kids will renounce. But the revenue neutral thing to me is like it's basically like we're going to a fist fight and we're chopping off our arm, going, all right, let's fight this out. And but we're only going to have one arm because we're going to sacrifice this whole revenue neutral, which by the way is dynamic. It's almost uncalculable. So any numbers that you present today will not scale in the future because other laws and other business and tax things will change. And what I mean about my children is my children are not a part of the US tax base originally, right? Right now they're not. So when you start talking revenue neutral and you're pulling in numbers, where do my children fall in that line? Why do my children have to have anything related to revenue neutral when they never once were even a part of the original tax base for anything? So to me, it just seems like apples and oranges, right? Yeah, okay, we're talking about fruits, but I don't, and then that comes back to the whole point where somebody else mentioned earlier, what do I say to my Congress member? If I tell my Congress member, support RBT, But actually, the DA is not doing RBT. It's like some carve-out version, which really scares me because then it just means more paperwork and more loopholes and justifications, and it's really, really scary. And we're really at the point where my children and I will be renouncing, and then the U.S. will lose us as people who are supporting Americans, spending the time doing these, being on this phone call, right? Like, I care enough to be on this call. I'm a Democrat, but God damn it, like, why are we shooting ourselves in the foot when we should be going full go? Like you said, this is our window, and forget all these loopholes. And like ACA, they are sponsored by the financial tax compliance industry. Look on their website. Look at who pays to go on their website. Why are we working with somebody who, if you ask them where they get their data and who they get their money from, they will never tell you. They will never tell you. There is no transparency with them. It scares the shit out of me who's sponsoring them. Do they do a lot of good things? Yes. I actually believe ACA is more good than they are bad. But I don't know. And I'm sorry I'm ranting, but it just really scares me that we're sticking to revenue neutral when I find it unfathomable how it can be construed into anything positive. But I don't know, maybe you can't answer that question, Carmelan, and I do appreciate everything else you're doing. This point, it scares me, really scares me.
Well, it may not make you feel any better, but the revenue that's going to come into the equation is going to be from the anti-avoidance provisions. It's going to be a lever that helps us sell the proposal to Senate Democrats. At the moment, if you're wealthy and you're renouncing, or and if you want to, through this proposal, become a non-resident for tax purposes, you're going to have a transition tax to pay. And that's because the attitude that the Congress has is that if you're migrating away from the United States and you are a person with very high net wealth, chances are you made some of that in the United States, and you can't just, they don't want, like, the idea that you're just going to walk out the door and take all the money that you made with you. So
and I agree.
That's
exactly like FATCA. That's exactly what Biden and Obama said. Hey, we're going to put FATCA because we have all these tax sheets, we're going to catch them. And who did FATCA catch? Not a single rich person. So now we're going with RBT with a fact that we're going to say, oh, anti-avoidance. But come on, rich people are going to be able to escape through that. So it just, I don't know, it just feels really deja vu. It's like, it scares me. It really scares me that we're going to put in this layer of anti-avoidance. This is how we're going to capture our money. But then what about all the unintended consequences of these anti-avoidance measures? I mean, aren't those are going to probably filter through just like they did with FATCA. And then we're going to be stuck with having all this other compliance. And we all thought we had RBT, but actually we didn't. We actually have some weird amorphous, or whatever you want to call it, version of a bill. And we're still stuck where I think a lot of us are still going to be stuck where we are today.
There are a lot of people who think that we should get a get out of jail free card. We should just be able to stop filing and not have any consequences to bear. Some ongoing declaration of our income, some way to stay in the tax system. There's a lot of support for that. There's also a lot of opposition to RBT at all for the reasons that someone talked about related to voting. Although it's not true, there are people that are utterly convinced that it cannot be implemented alongside a wealth tax. That is not true, but there are people who say if it's between RBT and a wealth tax, I don't want RBT, I want a wealth tax. So there are all kinds of opinions and views on this, and I hear it all, and I hear your anguish about this, and I share it. I can only just say that when we're in the room and we're across the table, we have to deal with the criteria, the concerns, and the stipulations that the members of Congress put on us. And we're just reading the terrain. And we know that if we want to get some amount of relief done for most of the people, this is what it's going to have to look like.
Yeah, and wouldn't the greatest stipulation be, we're not going to provide you votes from Americans or from Democrats abroad? I mean, there we go. That's that's the stipulation. Otherwise, all we're doing is voting for homelanders who don't care about us. And that's where I'm drawing the line. I got Trump out, but I'm done. Like, why? Why should I keep voting for people who don't care? And their only stipulation is all these other things. Like, I'm not voting for you guys anymore. You know, why can't we say that as DA? I mean, to me, it's a very simple message.
Well, it's not a really good negotiating position to put it. It's very
Okay,
it's very emotive, but it's not very, we're in the room trying to get to yes.
Yeah, I get it.
And also, in the room, you just don't talk about voting. You just wouldn't do that. But it's a real issue. It's a very important issue. I mean, as I said before, there are already people who are not voting because they're not compliant. If we can find a way to make them compliant, even if it's a declaration, then it's better than filing, and it brings them into compliance so that they will vote. And if we can do something for Americans abroad, then at least it'll make them feel like we've really done as much as we possibly could, because these things are incremental. The other thing is that, what's the alternative? Republicans had control of the White House, the House, and the Senate for 4 years and did nothing. They didn't touch FATCA. They didn't even try to touch FATCA. And they certainly didn't do anything for Americans abroad, with regard to territoriality. So,
well, they did get the bill. Holding did get the bill out with your help. So there's something.
He did the work on the bill and introduced it on the very last sitting day.
I know, but
it's all right. He sponsored the work. He sponsored the work, and he did, and his team was forthright and worked with us with integrity, and it was a very high integrity process.
And the previous 4 years under Obama and Biden, we got FATCA. So, I mean, again, I don't want to play that game. That's why I'm not talking about the past. I'm just looking at, we're having opportunity, golden opportunity. I agree with everything you're saying. We're all blue, and there's a lot of wave, there's a lot of influence. But why are we going to this? I feel like we're going to this battle with very few weapons, and we're actually just throwing some of them off by doing this revenue neutral, carve out, same country exception. Like, what? It doesn't actually make sense. If it doesn't make sense to us, and we all agree, then we actually have to do and our members of Congress don't understand it, then we have to do a better job messaging and actually educating them. Not necessarily about saying, well, you don't understand, so you know what, we're going to change this so you do understand, which actually is going to hurt us a little. Like, that doesn't make any sense. To me, it doesn't make sense. And maybe that's because I'm just frustrated to this point, and I don't know. But everything else that you're talking about, the filing modification, the FBAR reforms, the guilty, like, that all makes sense. But RBT is the biggest one. So why are we going to this fight with this small window, basically with a not fully loaded gun? And we all hate guns, but I'm sorry, it's the first analogy I can think of in my head. Okay, I'll keep volunteering as much as I can and try to help. I just would love to not have revenue neutral. And I don't know how we can change that, or if it's the boat has sailed and we have to be, this is the only option that we have.
Like I said, the model is still being developed, and we won't have a conversation if we go in with a big price tag. We're nowhere.
That's a shame. Okay.
Anthony, I just want to say I really appreciate your enthusiasm, and I'm looking forward to you making calls as well. It's really nice to have that energy here. Thank you very much for that, by the way. And Carmelan has told me many times that we're doing 1,000 things at once and hoping it all comes together and work. There was one last question I just wanted to get to from Stacy. I know you've been waiting patiently, so go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much, Carmelan. I really appreciate your dedication and everybody on the team, and also DAJ. I want to reframe the question a little bit for families who part of the family may be living in the States, and the other living abroad, not only myself but other people, that maybe they file jointly, and then due to the partner working in the States, then they do file, they do pay some taxes. And I was just wondering if that lot of citizens, U.S. citizens, other than the F-bar, would there be any changes in the reform for these international couples that travel back and forth? And I hope I said that in a cogent, coherent way.
If you're, look, I'm not gonna try to pluck apart your personal tax situation.
Yeah,
And so
no,
I'm
I wanted
probably
general. Yeah.
not in a position to say, let me think about it and we can talk
Oh,
about it offline if you want.
oh, okay. Well,
Because
that
I'd have
makes
to ask
sense.
you a few questions and I don't really feel comfortable doing that.
Oh,
So
okay.
we'll
Yeah,
talk
I
separately.
thank you so much. It seemed rather specific, and then I thought there are many families in this, but they all have different circumstances. So, okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Stacy.
your work. I will write to my congresswoman,
Thank you. Who is your congressperson?
Pramila Jayapal.
Oh, great.
Yeah, yeah. I will. I will call, not write. I will call. That'll be better. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just because it's 7:20 in Singapore, I just want to check. Does anyone else have any other questions? If you do, go in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask. I'll just wait a minute. Okay, so I'll just make one comment and leave it for Carmelan to close. First of all, thanks everyone for attending. And Carmelan, thank you so much. I know you're really, really busy, and you're always just you've made this specific time to educate everyone. This is great. Please, if you can, volunteer, call your congressmen, your senators. Every little thing helps, and every one person you can convince to do this does make a difference. And so please do that, and do vote. I know we get angry. Please vote. That is one of the most important things. And I'll leave it to you for Carmelan to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for these questions. It really helps me to learn about what people are thinking and feeling by doing these kind of Q&As, and helps me understand, the priorities of our community. And so I encourage you to write to me, to write to taxationtf@democratsabroad.org if you want to explore these concerns or questions, or other concerns and questions further. Please do reach out, because as I said, it helps me to be a better advocate, to understand, where people are coming from. So thank you again for being on the call. Please message your members of Congress and ask them for relief for Americans abroad, whatever that kind of relief means to you. Ask them for it, and then ask them again, next week, because this is the moment. It's happening right now, this month and next month, and that's why it's so important. So it's also a great opportunity, and let's just keep our eyes on the prize and see where we end up when we lift our head up at the end of the year. So thanks again.
Yeah, remember me, Vanessa, Carmelan, we're always here to help you guys out. So just text us. You got any questions? No questions too silly. Just reach out and we'll make sure your concerns are answered, because we want this just as much as all of you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for attending tonight, and hopefully we can have another update in the next few months, and everyone have a good, safe weekend. Thanks. I think this concludes everything, so you can sign off.
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to sign off. Everybody else, good night.
Thanks, Carmelan. Thanks, Ralph.
You're welcome.